Okay, so I'm Lindsay Brant. Many of you know me from my role in the Center for Teaching and Learning, but I'm also an adjunct faculty member at Smith School of Business, and my colleague Kate Rowbotham is here joining me today to talk about this exciting course that we were able to create and teach together over the last couple of years. So we've titled it From Idea to Idea Worth Teaching, the COMM354 journey. You'll see why at the end of the presentation, why that title is significant. But I'll toss it over to Kate for a moment just to introduce herself quickly before we get into things.
Good morning, everyone. Lindsay's going to be taking the bulk of the presentation today, but happy to answer any questions that might come up.
Okay, so quickly we will go over the background of the course overview, the learning outcomes, topics and themes, pedagogical approach, assessments, ungrading, and feedback and recognition for the course. So the background and how the course came to be, the course was co-created and co-taught by Kate and myself. It was initially conceived of in the winter of 2020 to put into the actions the recommendations of the Extending the Rafters Truth and Reconciliation Commission task report at Queen's, and the specific recommendation that each program at Queen's must include significant and meaningful Indigenous content. So we recognized during the summer of 2020, when there were events across campus, such as the Stolen by Smith Instagram account and the ongoing vandalism of the Four Directions Indigenous Student Center, that it was even more clear that there's a need for a course like this within any program, and more specifically at Smith. And so we also, that's not initially why we created it, it just became an additional catalyst to get this course out there and offer it to students immediately. We were driven initially by a desire to see a course offering focusing on Indigenous perspectives and content, and a desire as instructors to create a course where Indigenous students could see themselves reflected in curriculum and could feel a sense of home or connection point within Smith, and specifically within commerce. So that's when we set about to create this course. So the overview of the course is that it includes an examination of Indigenous worldviews, philosophies, and values as they relate to commerce, exchange, and capital. We explore Indigenous resurgence, seeking to understand different ways in which Indigenous peoples are reclaiming and reimagining relationships in business and beyond. We encourage students to critically examine how colonization has impacted present relations between Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples in business contexts, and begin to explore strategies for decolonizing in these spaces. Students will be encouraged to examine their own biases and worldview as they learn and to become effective and supportive aspiring allies for Indigenous peoples. So really students get a solid foundation the first few weeks. In the first module, actually, we focus a lot on Indigenous ways of knowing and doing, using the medicine wheel as an approach to guide student learning in the course. We also adopt a pedagogy of peace, centering students and their voices and shaping the direction of the learning. So I'll talk a little bit about the pedagogy of peace and that approach a little bit later. So the learning outcomes for the course are that students will outline the history of Indigenous peoples, commerce, exchange, and relationship with capital, define colonization, and explore ways to collectively work towards decolonizing and building mutually respectful relationships with Indigenous peoples, engage in critical thinking about bias and worldview, and then identify what reconciliation means in a business context and articulate strategies for it. And then some of the topics and themes within the course are creating a community of care. We really emphasize that and spend the first couple of weeks in the course creating a community of care by talking about what that means, talking about our pedagogical approach, talking about what it means to create that space for each other of accountability and sharing and learning and growth, and encourage students to add anything into that conversation that they need to feel that sense of community within our classroom. Indigenous worldviews, we talk about all my relations, so talking about all aspects of creation and how we're connected to land and other than humans and humans within the world that we share. Economies of care, extractive industries, TRC and UNDRIP, we talk a lot about policies and how we can begin to move those calls to action forward. Indigenous entrepreneurship and indigeneity in corporate Canada, allies and accomplices. So what we did, the first year we had mostly engagement through podcasts and other materials, but this year we actually brought in a lot more guest speakers. We had several guest speakers join our class this year to talk about their own businesses. We had one guest presenting on positive mindset in business spaces and her journey throughout different business careers. And then we also had someone talking about decolonizing wealth and what it means to think about wealth in a different way. And what it means to talk about capitalism in a different way. So those were some interesting additions to the course this year. The pedagogical approach, as I mentioned, is to create a community of care. So we co-create classroom guidelines with students and talk about what a brave, inclusive, accountable, respectful, and peace-focused and loving space looks like and feels like. So the first week focus is really around that. And we do weekly check-ins and check-outs. We did this on Zoom quickly in the chat to say, sometimes it was themed, like, what are you grateful for today? What is one word to describe your emotion? What's a song title that describes how you're feeling today? And then we also did a checkout at the end of this Zoom time together as well. And then obviously this year we were able to move in person for the last end of the course. So we did similar style check-ins in a sharing circle format. We did a learner-centered approach, so student-led learning left room for topics suggested by students and discussion-based. So we allowed for Padlets and discussion and collaboration where students could actually feed us articles or content that they would like to cover that related to the materials that we already had within the course. And we would quickly debrief those or discuss those or add them into the following week if we didn't have time for them that day and in that moment. But we were able to engage with a lot of student-led initiatives too in that way. We chose to uplift and prioritize Indigenous voices, text, podcast, articles, media, case studies, even the bringing in of guest speakers. 2 out of 3 of our guest speakers were Indigenous. And then we also used a lot of reflective opportunities. So we used Padlets, which we found to be a really great tool when we were virtual. And then we also use them to some degree when we came back together in person, reflective journals, discussions, and then office hours to debrief and talk about content that students maybe still had lingering questions about beyond the space and time of the class. And we really engage with critical pedagogy. So thinking of themes of radical hope and love and critical Indigenous pedagogy, such as the pedagogy of peace, which I'll talk about now. So the Pedagogy of Peace is a curriculum model and framework that I developed with Dr. Lindsay Brant and Faculty of Education. Kate and I have really basically embodied this and really lived it in the way that we teach this course. And so this is a very brief visual of the model. The model is founded upon the Great Law of Peace, or Haudenosaunee Great Law of Peace, of which there are 3 values core to that. So peace itself, a good mind, and then also strength. And so we really embodied that, plus an additional 4th element that makes its way into this model is self and relation. So really thinking about our relationship to ourselves and our relationship to others and how we can nurture that within learning spaces. I can provide a link to more information on that too, because that's a very, very brief description of the model, which is very complex and robust and can be used in many different contexts. And then assessments in the course. We really did highlight reflective journaling as our key component to the course. We wanted students to be able to take time and space to draw out key themes and insights, talk about things that surprised or frustrated them as they engage with the topics, and then gaps in their existing knowledge or experience of the topic, and then where they might go next. How would they apply what they're learning to different aspects of their own lives or any other situation that's important to them. So we had 4 reflections, 1 for each of the 3 modules, and a final ungrading submission. So the format of the reflections was open. We did provide some guiding thoughts and words around that, but they could do written format, podcast, audio, visual, creative, or artistic in nature, as long as they could explain what the creative piece meant and how that connected to their learning. So we use, as I said, a lot of discussion-based opportunities, Padlets, breakout rooms, with an aim to have a collaborative space and a kind of shared learning approach, because conversations around decolonization and indigenization are challenging when many of our students are brand new to the topic. Some might have a bit of background in Indigenous content or connections with community in some kind of way, but many are brand new to it. And these are 3rd and 4th year commerce students. So it's challenging to speak about things when you feel like you're not at that level yet, where you can articulate the meaning behind what you're trying to express. So to share in that way and to create a space where we all feel okay about making missteps and mistakes was something that we really tried to foster. And the best way to kind of do that is to learn just to jump in and do it and be okay with missteps and being okay with being accountable to those missteps and calling each other into conversation and exploring it together. So we really used Padlet, which was a valuable tool because you can also do something interesting with Padlet where you can use a map, and we created a pin drop where students could introduce themselves and their what feels like home to them. So they could put their hometown or their place that they're most connected to. And that was a great way to launch into our connection with each other too. And then we also use Padlets to explore in the breakout rooms, and then for them to come back to the whole group and present from their Padlet what they talked about in the breakouts. And Kate and I intentionally stayed out of the breakouts unless we were called in to engage in conversation, because we really wanted that to be student-led and student-focused, and wanted them to feel that they could talk about whatever they needed to talk about in those spaces without our influence or interjection, unless they had questions around what they were engaging with. And then the ungrading submission, we asked them to do a final, basically we call it an essay or an approach to the course, where they can write about in any format what to look back on the course and think about their experience, think about the learning and development, their growth, and they're really only measuring against themselves. So where were you when you began the course? What were the learning goals that you set out for yourself in the beginning, and did you meet them, and how did you meet them? We really wanted to encourage students to approach this with both humility and confidence, to honor yourself in the work that you did, but also trust yourself to make a fair determination of your grade. And surprisingly, students do an incredible job with this. They often actually undervalue their work. I have very few instances where I've seen students inflate their grade and say that they deserve an A+ when they're not at that level. They're often sometimes like undervaluing, and I have to like talk to them and say, like, I think you actually did get an A+, and you're saying you got a B. So here's what my thoughts are, right? So and then also we ask them to consider what they've struggled with, and often they're very open and honest with this part. They'll say what was challenging for them, that they underperformed in areas where they thought they should have been performing better. But the interesting thing is that they actually learn to be different types of learners in this space. A lot of them had said, I'm one that's very vocal, but in this class I was listening, and actually that's the way that I learned most in this space. And I was okay with giving up kind of airtime or that talking time to other students and learning from them. And I was able to take that information and put it into my reflection and think about it beyond class. And that's not normally my approach, but it worked really well in this instance. And so we hear that often, actually, is that students are okay with stepping back and kind of absorbing and then reflecting on that information. So we also asked them to consider the ways that they engage with their classmates, professors, TAs. What shifted in your critical thinking? What are areas that you moved forward? Did it start conversations outside of class or within the classroom space? And then also just some points for them to talk about or to think about learning, because sometimes they need a bit more guidance around how to actually grade. So we talk a lot about grading. We talk a lot about our pedagogy, and then we also meet with them throughout to give feedback in real time if they're wondering where they're at in the course, because as you can imagine, this is quite a shift from a very competitive business school environment where they're very grades focused. They're very wanting to get the top of the class. They want to compete with each other, but this is a very non-competitive approach and a very specific approach where they're asked to reflect on themselves only, and not really reflect or comment on their achievement, but like their growth more specifically. And so that's sometimes a challenging shift, but one that is welcomed by, I would say, almost all of the students have said how meaningful this approach has meant. So here's some student feedback. We have students express that the course was a welcome addition to their learning experience and mentioned that they would love to have it earlier in their undergraduate degree. It's 3rd and 4th year level. Students love the discussion-based aspect, but said it's important to strike a balance between lecture style and discussion because it can feel intimidating, as I highlighted, when many students are new to Indigenous topics. So we've really tried to foster that balance. Students could immediately find ways to relate material to their context as early career, soon to be business leaders or entrepreneurs. The ungrading approach, as I mentioned, was a way to de-emphasize competition and.
Oh, I think you got unmuted. We're at time. Sorry, Lindsay. Do you want to take 20 seconds to wrap up?
If I could take 20 seconds, I'll wrap up quickly. Thanks. So this is the reason for the title is what you're probably all wondering about. Why is it called Idea to Idea Worth Teaching? Kate and I did receive an award called Ideas Worth Teaching Award for this course. And so we were pleased to receive recognition. I mean, recognition enough was the journey that we went through with our students and the growth that we see them experience. And it was nice to have this professionally recognized as well, but not the reason we created it for sure. The reason we created it was to have this space for students. And it's been nice though to see the support for it beyond Smith and within Smith even. So we were encouraged to create this as a summer enrichment program for grad students, which we did in summer of 2021. And then we're encouraged to move this course forward so that it's constantly on offer at Smith. So